Hey buddies, how's it going? Thank you so much for clicking on this episode and giving this podcast a chance. If you do really like this, go ahead and if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, comment, and you subscribe to my channel. Or share this video with your friends and family. And if you're listening to it on anything else, Spotify, Apple Play, Breakerbox, Castbox, just go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And then if you want to contact me, just go to my Instagram at More with Stumpo Podcast or just More with Stumpo. And then also go to my Facebook and you can contact me there. If you have any questions, if you want to tell me how I did, if I did really good, if I did really bad, things I can work on. I do want to get better. But in this episode, I got to speak with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. I had a fantastic discussion, and I also got to speak with his Vice President of Operations, Mike Baldwin. Mike Baldwin served for 21 or 23 years out in Arizona as a homicide detective, and obviously Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, fantastic American author, spent a lot of his time in the military. He speaks with police officers across the country, and he's got plenty of books out there. Right now I'm reading one of them, and it is just a fantastic read. I'm reading On Combat. So in this episode, we speak about sleep deprivation. We talk about a little bit of suicide for first responders. We talk about how to speak with your significant others, your husbands and your wives, about your job and what entails in that. So I really hope that you guys enjoy this episode. Please let me know down at the bottom, and please enjoy. Mike, we'll go ahead and start with you. Just introduce yourself to the people that are listening here.
Hi, my name is Mike Baldwin. I'm a retired homicide detective out of the Phoenix, Arizona area. And I just recently joined the Grossman team, Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. And we have rebranded our company recently, and now we're called Grossman on Truth. And now I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel Grossman.
Mike, hey, and Matt, I'm Dave Grossman. Retired Army officer and author, and had the honor to do a lot of work with fire service and law enforcement across 25 years since I retired. And please be on your podcast and impressed with where you're going and what you're doing, and to be able to be of service to the audience out there.
Thank you so much, sir. Both of you gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and your busy schedules to come on my little show here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Lieutenant Colonel, I've got a couple questions for you, and it's going to be starting off with just what have been some of the more profound experiences that you've encountered with speaking with first responders?
Yeah, where it keeps coming up over and over again is the responses that really bother people and being able to normalize those responses. That psychologists use the term normalizing, and that's too trivial a term for something so powerful. Just one quick example, memory gaps. About half of all cops in a deadly force incident have gaps in the memory, just flat out blackouts. And a police officer's wife, the guy had come to the home to kill the family while the cop was on duty. And that's the world we're in today. And the police officer's wife killed this guy. And she told me I never lost a second of sleep over killing this guy to protect my family. And she said, what really bothered me was I heard my voice on the audio recording of the 911 call. And to this day, I have no memory of making that call. And she said, but then somebody showed me your book. It's not enough to say, oh, that's normal. They showed me a book and said, look, page 55, half of all cops have memory gaps. Boom, she was fine. So I can give you that story 100 times over, 1,000 times over, where people think they're in the isolation when we realize these are common reference points for everybody. Then that's just this profound revelation and healing and empowering that comes up over and over again.
Yes, sir. There's been a few experiences that I've even faced myself within memory gaps and memory loss. And I'll use an example of just something that recently happened. We had an extrication call here at the fire department that I work for. And I was just the driver of that. We were the first rig on scene. We get there, we try to do stabilization. There's not much stabilization at that point that we could have done. But once they started cutting on the car, once the extrication team got there, in my head, it seemed like it took 20, 30 minutes. And at the end of it, I was like, my God, that took a long time. And then I talked to our battalion chief at the time, and I said, how long was that extrication? And he's like, and he was outside of the scene. He goes, it was 7 minutes. I was like, how did that time slow down? Like in my head, how did that slow down? And then at the end of that scene, I was just thinking, how how in the world did my brain just literally just slow everything down? But at that point, what is it we're looking for? Is it time slowing down to where I'm checking, okay, what's the condition on the patient? What's condition of the vehicle? Is there fluids that are leaking out? How's the stabilization? How's the scene looking? Are there people that are walking up saying, hey, I was kind of tossed out of that car? If we're looking around for extra people, it was just, there were so many things that come up in your head. And it just psychologically just kind of just blows my mind once you sit there and just evaluate yourself after a call. Is there anything for the military that you guys do, like a lot of debriefing on your incidents after a scene?
I think if anybody's in a deadly force incident or a stressful event of any kind, every call out, every rollout, to the best of our ability, we should have a debriefing. Police officers used to do it, on the way at home. They had choir practice. They'd sit over a beer and they'd talk over a beer, which can be healthy if you keep it under control. But we know from a training event that most of the learning happens afterwards in what's called the AAR, the after action review. How much more so would we learn from the debrief after an actual tactical event? And you've heard of CISM, Critical Incident Stress Management. I teach at their conference every year, the International Conference in Baltimore, and everybody sits around and talks about what happened. But they all have a bottle of water in front of them. And if everybody starts to become emotional, they stop and take that swig of water, and that pulls them from fight or flight to rest and digest. That controls from the very beginning this response that can evolve into PTSD. So we fill in the memory gaps, we sort out the memory distortions, we learn the training lessons, and we go about the healthy process, separating the memory from the emotions from the very beginning. So a debriefing after any event is really essential for us to learn from it, to apply it, and to come out of it healthier.
Sir, what are some of the basic fundamentals of psychology, especially for people that are in first responders positions? Something that they should be looking towards in themselves.
Right. Well, I think it comes back to knowing what happens in the event. Auditory exclusion. I had a firefighter tell me that a helicopter had landed behind him and he never heard it. How can this helicopter be right there, these incredible loud turbines, and he never heard it? So auditory exclusion, tunnel vision, memory gaps, memory distortion, so important to know about those things. But even more important is to know afterwards something triggers the memory, your heart starts pounding. That is not PTSD. It's sympathetic nervous system arousal. It becomes PTSD when you try to not think about it. You'll literally drive yourself crazy trying to not think about it. You got to make peace with the memory. And it begins in the debriefing when you got a bottle of water in front of you and you talk about it, start to become emotional, take that swig of water. It pulls us from fight or flight to rest and digest, and begins that process of healing. So I think how the body responds afterwards, and how we can control that with the breathing or the swig of water, that lies at the very heart of understanding what happened to your mind and body and what we can do about it.
Mike, this question is going to go towards you. With your position that you were in out in Arizona for 21 years,
Yep.
Is that so? With your position, how were you able to cope with a lot of the calls that you would see, the traumatic events that you would see, and as well, for people in the military, how did you cope with it, and what worked best for you?
No, it's a good question, and a lot of people have told me, "Hey, there's no way I could do your job when you were working on homicide and violent crimes. All you saw was death. We'd respond to suicide calls, any unattended deaths." And so you do get jaded of seeing this stuff, but there's a few scenes that certainly would stick with you, and certainly a truly innocent victim, an elderly lady, a child. And so there was a case involving a 2-year-old boy whose mother killed him. And that case took a toll on me as well as the firefighters that responded to the scene. And I ended up having to interview them as witnesses to the homicide. And you don't forget about it, but you don't dwell on it either. So it's a memory. It's a scar. It's something that happened in my life. I had outlets, good outlets, church, family that I could talk to. I wasn't a drinker, and so I didn't, go to the bottle like some guys do. And in police and fire, we're macho, we're too tough, we don't want to show signs of weaknesses.
Yeah.
Talking about a scene is not a sign of weakness. It's actually coming from a point of strength, and other people can benefit from it because then they go, you know what, I was thinking the same thing, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. So getting through these situations, yeah, I think of it from time to time, but when it comes up, I don't crawl in the fetal position and, fear. I know that it happened. I know what I did was right on the scene, and hopefully I don't have to go to those again, but it is part of my job, and it's what you signed up for, but I don't want to just go through the motions. I want to be good at what I do. And as the colonel said, not everybody reacts the same way. Family members sometimes are crying. Sometimes family members are stoic, and you're like, wow, nothing affects this person. I've been on a scene of a child drowning, and the grandfather was cracking jokes. It was his way of coping. It wasn't that he was guilty. And so we have to understand and make allotment that guys will react differently from time to time.
And Colonel, this question kind of goes towards you. For you, if people are not really reacting in a certain way, let's go with first responders. Let's say, oh, it doesn't bother me, this is some simple stuff. Do you think that is possible that they have been traumatized by a previous call that they still have yet gotten to go over because it's kind of just the main point of their focus, which any other traumatic event to let's say it would be for me, but for that person, they're still dealing with that previous trauma. It just doesn't affect them as much. Is there any psychology on that you've seen?
Yeah, there's this concept of the bathtub model of stress. Or a friend of mine, Susan Simmons, calls it the garbage can. All this stuff is coming in, and you never had a chance to empty the garbage. And it can flow in so hard and so much and so fast. The bathtub model, you can only drain so much at a time. When it comes in faster than you can process, it builds up on you. If it gets to be so much it overflows the bathtub, then you start doing damage. So all of us have got some level at which we can only drain so much, and there's things we can help with draining the bathtub. But, when we talk about PTSD, the major factors in PTSD is, number one, previously unresolved issues. Number two, the magnitude of the trauma. And number three, the social support network afterwards. So we got before, during, and after dynamics in play. And it's the before dynamic that's really the wild card in the equation. And you think you're fine and you're driving on, but in reality, the bathtub is just steadily filling up. And the drain is clogged, or it's not draining fast enough, and it builds up on you over time, and then you get that overload dynamic. And I think the bottom line is that we all need to understand that there's no shame in getting help. How can you help other people if you can't help yourself? Being able to talk about these things with a professional is one of the healthiest things that we can do. And if you find yourself having any complication in your life, in your family, in your job, being able to go, and again, Mike and I will both talk very strongly from a faith perspective. Being able to talk to your pastor or pastoral counseling would be a very straightforward dynamic that can be in play if you're from a faith perspective. And faith is critical to resiliency. And in many ways, faith adds to the drain, and faith makes a bathtub bigger, and allows you to have this
in lighter too.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. So for some of the people that kind of don't understand the signs or symptoms of these traumatic events, what are some of the things that they should be looking for in their lives, such as like sleep deprivation, anxiety, depression? What are some of the more signs that you should be looking for in yourself or in others?
Most of the warning signs is when you see changes in your behavior. You're no longer seeking, whatever it was that gave you pleasure before, you're not doing it. Conflict with your relationship, or especially relationship with your spouse. Conflict with other people that you work with. And these are all dynamics that are kind of indicators of a potential issue. the key is to be able to go get that help, and to know that again, you can't help others if you can't help yourself.
Yes.
If you're seeing parts of your life come unglued, then you need to be, sometimes it's okay to say I'm not okay, and to seek that assistance. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Continue off of that with the relationship aspect. Do you think the reasoning being of the relationships with firemen and police with their significant others, whether it be their husbands or their wives, is such a victim of their careers? Why it's so difficult? Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
And I think Mike really has something to that. He and his spouse have really had an amazing relationship in which he's able to talk about these things. I think he can address that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can speak for the police academy. I'm not sure about the fire academy, but you're almost conditioned from day one at the Phoenix Regional Police Academy by the instructors that within 5 years of doing this job, you'd probably get a divorce. Well, I didn't want to be a statistic. Yeah. I took an oath to my wife before I took an oath to the police department and to the Constitution of the United States. And we've been married for 28 years by God's grace. And it hasn't been perfect, and it hasn't always been easy, but nothing worthwhile is easy, and it takes some work. And it's easy to blame your situation and your job, and it's an excuse. And I've seen guys whose lives have been ruined by affairs and divorce, and I don't wish that on anybody. But it doesn't have to be, because I know that there's also several guys that I worked alongside that have been faithful to their spouse all these years, and it can be done. I think we sometimes give ourselves an excuse because we want to do what we want to do, and say, oh, it's the stressors of the job. Well, love means that the harder things get, the more I'm going to fight for it. And so I love my wife and I love my family, and certainly I love God, and I don't want to disappoint any of them.
And Matt, our book, Bulletproof Marriage, has really taken off. It's a 90-day devotional, and the very first day is Mission Impossible. This idea that, oh, your marriage won't survive. Well, we're going to dedicate ourselves to be in that percentage of the ones that do survive. Where failure is not an option, that we're going into this relationship determined to be the ones that do survive. Mike told a story one time about how, his wife calls and says, I got to go in make an entry right now. And his buddy said, you tell your wife what you're going to do. And I think that's so healthy. Can you share that story, Mike?
Yeah, so I had a detective friend of mine, and he would basically lie to his wife and downplay the dangers of what we were doing. I was honest with her and said, hey, stand by. I got someone at gunpoint right now. Where he would be like, oh, Mike and I are just going to go into this place to have something to eat. And meanwhile, we're in the middle of South Phoenix in a bad neighborhood. Because she couldn't live with it and she couldn't handle it. So part of what made my job easier is when I left for work, my wife had faith and confidence in God. She also had faith and confidence in my ability. You're an engineer of a fire truck. That's a pretty important job. And there's a lot of stupid people out there driving cars that want to cut the fire truck off. You got to have your head on a swivel, but that thing is a heavy piece of equipment that does not stop on a dime.
No.
But you are trained. You're confident in your ability. You've probably pulled some things off with that truck that most people would be like, wow, I didn't know you could do that. That's what I want to do. I want to be good at my job. I also want to be honest. And so, I didn't always talk about every nitty gritty thing with my wife, but I shared a lot with her about what we were doing and what I was doing. And I think that helped her realize that I was being honest with her. and she knew how to pray for me throughout the day. At the end of the day, you know, we have to have confidence in God that he's going to protect us. I truly believe in guardian angels. There are times when I'm pretty sure they were working overtime to protect me and the guys that I was with. There's no doubt about it.
There's been a few times on my end and the stories that I've heard from other firemen that there's definitely, if you don't believe that there is a higher power in God, that there are so many things that it just bleed for, there has to be something more. There has to be an ultimate provider and protector. And he watches over guys. And you just hear stories from other firemen. I did an episode with one of the guys, and he should have been dead in one of his fires. He tells the story. His name was Steve Dillman. He should have been dead, but just somehow he survived. He lost his mask and he just was breathing in smoke. He should have died inside of that house fire, but there was something watching over him. And I truly believe that. Wow. So do you think with guys that don't talk to their wives, I've had this experience before where you go to try to talk to your significant other or a family member and they just don't understand, and you just have a difficult time trying to explain why. How can you help them understand that there might be times where you really just don't want to talk about it right now? Or just, can you kind of ask the right questions? How can your significant other ask the right questions? That's the tough one for me.
Well, you know, it's funny. Again, there's a whole section of the book on communication, and just, you know, it's 10 minutes a day, sheepdog and spouse, 90-day devotional, and there's a whole section on filling in those gaps and getting through that communication barrier. But if we can step back, you talked about that. There's got to be a higher power out there, and you know, he's not hiding under a rock somewhere. You know, if there is a God, we'd all know about it. You know, his word would be in every hotel room. His houses of worship would be in every city. But if I talk about it in my book on spiritual combat, praise God, Christian Book Award finalist, kind of ties in with On Combat. It really is made to weave in with On Combat. But we talk about, if you see evil, then how can you deny the existence of evil? You see it every day. If you see evil and you don't have a force for good on your side, that can make it really hard. And that comes back to answering your question about how you and your spouse, if you have this common frame of reference of this higher power, and this common frame of reference of faith being part of your life and church being part of your life and having a life outside the job, it can help tie those pieces together. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. It does. So with talking with our spouses, I know I used to be married, and I'm not anymore, obviously. So for mine, it was very difficult for me to sit and explain to my ex-wife at the time, my wife at the time, what I was dealing with at work and what I was seeing, without wanting to put a lot of that pressure on her. Because we would see some stuff. Obviously, Mike, you would see this out being a homicide detective, and you don't want to bring it home. You want to just put it, it's almost like you just sit there and you kind of just toss it in a vase before you walk in the house, because you just don't want to bring that baggage with you, and you don't want to put that on top of your significant other. What is a healthy way of explaining to them so that way they're not having those nightmares at night, or they're not sitting there dwelling on a lot of that stuff? Either one of you guys could enlighten me on that.
Yes. So I think I was blessed in that regard, because my wife, my family, they wanted to know what I'm going through. I did spare them some of the details and the nitty gritty, but there were times, and you could probably attest to this, I basically took my clothes off in the garage and walked in just in my underwear because of the scene that I was just on. I wasn't going to bring that garbage into my house. And so when I came in like that, they knew that I had been on a pretty nasty scene. So I think the key is for them not to immediately ask, hey, what happened? But I'll talk about it when I'm ready to talk about it. It's helpful for them to know when that time is. And sometimes it wasn't until the next day that then we had a conversation to let me kind of decompress and process it. And so I was blessed with a wife that wanted to know the kind of scenes that I was on. And that was healthy for our relationship, because I wasn't hiding it from her. I did protect her and my kids. There's some things that they shouldn't know. They'll never know how great they had it, having not walked into a drug-ridden heroin house and how nasty that smells and stinks, and just the filth and the roaches and all that stuff crawling around. But I can share some details about how thankful I am for how we live and how our house is compared to that drug-infested house.
Yes, and that's something that is very, it's a blessing to be able to understand and see all walks of life, from people who are wealthy to people who are poor, and the conditions that they live and the ways that they were raised. Do you think that fatherless households are part to blame in a lot of this stuff, having a bad leadership or no leadership in a house for these people who are kind of just being raised to raise themselves? Do you think, would you agree with that at all, or do you think it could be anything else?
Colonel, is that for you or me?
Go ahead, Mike.
It's for any of you guys.
Yeah, so I do believe that having a father figure in a home is huge and important. Having the right type of father is huge and important. And there's some men that truly have abandoned their role, and they will have to stand and answer for that someday, I believe, because they've given up and then they've turned that responsibility over maybe to their wife, and she's stepped up to her credit. But yeah, we can look around America and some of the homes that I've gone in, you've gone in, you can see the dysfunction. And part of that is because there is no male leadership in the home.
And it is sad to say, and I had this conversation actually just recently at work, and somebody gave me an excellent response. And they said that everyone has the opportunity to have a father, and it's God, and it's in the Bible. And when they said that, I was like, oh my gosh, like that is,
it's funny that the Bible says that he is the father to the fatherless. He's the father to the orphan, that's a beautiful part of the whole equation. And again, there's so much about getting raised right and having the right direction, but we can't use that as an excuse either. And when we study people who turned out good, they're in a fatherless home, they're in a bad community, everything was crazy for them, and yet they turned out okay. And what an interesting set of research that is. And the answer is that there was some consistent positive role model in their life. It could be the grandmother, it could be an uncle. The whole big brothers, big sisters concept is built around this research that says there's going to be this one stable relationship in this person's life, and you're going to be it, and you accept that responsibility. So you might have a nephew, you might have a niece that needs your help, and you can be that steady, stable person in their life. They don't have a father, and you can help fill that gap to a certain degree by being there for them, even if it's just once a week. Spend an hour in the park with them, and religiously dedicate that and talk to them about their life and fill in that gap. It's easy to make excuses, and we've got to fight so hard to not fail our children, not fail in those roles, but also not to accept defeat, to turn around and say, okay, this is a circumstance where now, how do we overcome it? Now, how do I help somebody else overcome it? If that all kind of makes sense.
It does make sense. And something that has kind of just kept, I don't know what it is, but it keeps popping in my head these past few days that I've been doing a lot of this research, is if you're not going to be facing, and you're just giving excuses and you're not facing the problem, it's going to create more of an issue. It's going to create a snowball effect, and it's just going to keep building and building up. And
it brings us back to sharing with your spouse. It's in On Combat. I call it the fundamental human equation. That pain shared is pain divided, and joy shared is joy multiplied. And you see that at a funeral. We go to a funeral and we share our pain. But we also remember there's a lot of laughter in a funeral. My dad's funeral, there was a lot of laughter. We remembered the good times, remembered the funny stuff, and we multiplied our joy and we divided our pain. So your spouse can be that person there that you should be able to share these things with and divide that pain and multiply that joy. sometimes you got to mull it over a little bit yourself. But when that time comes, I've been married for 47 years now, my high school sweetheart.
Congratulations.
And being able to share things with her, after a little while, after we've digested it, is really one of the blessings in our lives.
Now, I do have this, and you don't have to answer this specifically, but for some of the coping mechanisms for people who are dealing with traumatic experiences, I know in my case, dark humor is a really big one. Things that, as you're walking away from seeing, Mike, I'm sure you've seen a lot, and maybe you dealt with like some dark humor with your colleagues or even yourself. Is that something that your significant others have kind of dove into a little bit, or is that just, do you think that's just our just messed up brains, that the way is just kind of put it on the back burner, make a joke about it, then just move on?
Yeah, I've the advent of the camera, the taser camera that officers are wearing. Are fire guys wearing cameras now or no?
No, no.
Okay.
Not that I've seen, no.
And so here's where it hurts you, because part of our coping mechanism when you're at a bloated body or a decomposition, it is nasty, it stinks, and you make some comment to your colleague, it is a coping mechanism, but it sounds so bad out of context. I would never want that on the media, because that's not generally how I talk. But I also know that person is gone. That's just a shell of somebody there. Yeah. That's just what was housing their soul. So I do think that there is some police and fire and other professions, they do that. And it's almost called like locker room talk. It's not something that I would talk in front of my wife about, because it's not appropriate. And so you do have to be wise. And some people don't have that filter and can't shut it off. So what do you think, Colonel?
I've been a victim of that.
Yeah. Well, what I tell my audience is, laughter could be inappropriate. Laughter could be cruel. But most of the time, laughter is a powerful tool that says this has no power over me. To be able to laugh about it is to be able to say this has no power over me. So Mike's so right. Now that everything is caught on camera, we've got to be so careful about that. We got to put it through a filter, and we can do that. It's not impossible. Don't cop a pity party here. Recognize that it can be healthy. It says this has no power over me, but also recognize how it's going to look when the family of this guy, in court, watches the video of what you had to say. So everything you say, that I had a commander one time said that when you're talking to your troops, you should say everything you say to them as though their mother was standing there. It's not always that easy, but it puts a filter through what you're doing and what you're saying. And he said, talk to them as though I was standing there and their mother was standing there, and put it through that filter, and you can dodge an awful lot of bullets in life and a lot of stupid stuff that could come out your mouth. But we've got to create an environment which people have the right to make a few mistakes too. Just one or two mistakes. We're all young, we all foolish, we all have inappropriate coping mechanisms, and we need to have a mechanism in place. Now, if it's persistent over time, you say, wait a minute, you need to change, or you need to find another job, Yeah. But all of us should have a little bit of freedom to be human. And we need to recognize that as leaders, but we also need to recognize that we need to grow. And at the heart of it is self-control. The laconic Spartan, the stoic Roman, the inscrutable samurai, the stiff upper-lip Brit, and today we talk about the quiet professional. The quiet professional. Nobody's impressed by your temper tantrum. They're impressed by your calm. And we strive for that self-control. It's easy to say, it's not so easy to do. But we want to set that model and strive for that standard of self-control. Call it stoicism, call it the quiet professional. But and inappropriate laughter can get in so much trouble in this day and age. Yeah,
it really can. And Mike, what were you about to say?
Yeah, I was saying sometimes we actually have to have a tough conversation with our colleagues, and it'd be incumbent upon me as a professional, if I saw something that was inappropriate at a scene, to pull that guy aside and say, hey, not here. and you need to watch it. We need to develop some empathy for what the family there is facing. You as a firefighter, yeah, you live with these guys. You work out together, you eat together, you sleep. You're with each other all the time. You actually have to be man enough to have a conversation with somebody, and he has to be humble enough to accept it, that it's coming from a good place.
Yes. In the way of bringing it up to somebody. So like I've had to deal with this situation too many times that I've had to count with dealing with somebody who me being a younger dude or younger fireman, and having to address to an older fireman what just happened was inappropriate, and that cannot happen on scene ever again. And that is such a difficult conversation to have. But for those who are listening that have had to deal with something like that or haven't dealt with it, but they've witnessed it, I highly suggest just nipping it in the bud, standing up and just doing it. Not only does it help out, it's not that you're worried about your street cred or you're worried about your honor, but you're doing what's right and you're standing up for the right thing. And it's so difficult to do it. But once you do it, you've set a precedent for your crew and for others. And they know where your line is at. And that's something that I respect in a lot of people. Colonel, I've got a question for you regarding towards sleep deprivation and for first responders, or really for anybody. What are some of the negative effects of sleep deprivation?
If we obviously coordinated ahead of time, and if I only had 5 minutes to talk, this is the subject I would talk on. The thing to understand is sleep deprivation makes you stupid. It impairs your judgment. 18 hours without sleep, your impaired judgment equal to 0.08 legally drunk blood alcohol level. 24 hours without sleep, and you're the equivalent of 0.10 above legally drunk. 2 nights without sleep, and you're psychotic. Any graduate of Army Ranger School or SEER School will tell you about hallucinations on the 3rd day without sleep. And we've got people all around us that are profoundly sleep deprived. Do an online search for global epidemic of sleep deprivation, and look what comes up. The research is there. The video games, the text messaging, the social media, the binge watching TV shows, it's eating us alive. So if impaired judgment, maybe just 5 hours a night for 2 weeks will put you in the same situation as having gone 24 hours without sleep, that you can have this sleep debt that piles up. It's a key factor in suicide, and everybody needs to understand that. We look at suicides. I lost a little brother to suicide. I lost 2 nephews to suicide. At the time, it was like, no note, no letter, there's no huge trauma in their life. Why? Well, when we go back now and we say, what about sleep deprivation? Boom, at least 1 out of those 3 cases. My nephew locked himself in his room and played the new video game for 5 days straight, and on about the 5th day, he killed himself. And it's just sleep deprivation. Taking your life is not a natural act. Every living organism has this powerful drive to self-preservation. You have to have profoundly impaired judgment to take your life. And sleep deprivation does that. Now, alcohol and suicide have always been related. Alcohol creates impaired judgment. You make a bad decision, never a chance to rethink it. But the most pervasive form of impaired judgment is sleep deprivation. We're in the middle of it. The other thing that sleep deprivation is a key factor in traffic deaths. So here's our 2 major killers of first responders: suicide and traffic deaths. And if we gave a damn about it, the place we'd focus it is sleep. It is irresponsible. If somebody showed up to work drunk, you'd kick his tail. If he shows up to work sleep deprived because he played video games all night long, he needs his tail kicked. There's nothing funny about it. There's nothing acceptable about it. So sleep deprivation is a key factor in suicide. Teen suicides, teenagers, has exploded worldwide. Traffic deaths have exploded worldwide. Decade after decade, we brought traffic deaths down. Airbags, seatbelts, medical technology, and now everywhere for the last decade, traffic deaths are back up. What is the new factor? Well, there's a reason why airline pilots and truck drivers are required by law to get enough sleep. And we were talking about parenting, making sure that your kids get enough sleep is so critical. The 3rd major cause of death that has exploded is opiate overdoses. Opiate. Why opiates? Why are prescription opiates have always been there? Why are they the drug of choice? Well, we're in the middle of an epidemic of chronic pain. Do another online search for sleep deprivation and chronic pain. And so I heard all the time, give me a pill to fix it, I need a pill, you need more sleep. If you're not sleeping, the tendons and muscles never get a chance to fully relax. It creates chronic pain, and you're not getting the deep cycle sleep. These mega doses of caffeine are stopping us from getting deep cycle sleep. So 3 major causes of death have exploded worldwide. Now you're a responder, you're EMS fire guy. I mean, connect the dots here. 3 epidemics worldwide: suicide, traffic deaths, and opiate overdoses. 1 new factor worldwide, an epidemic of sleep deprivation. Plus, everybody knows heart disease and obesity are a key factor in sleep deprivation. So let's call it 5 global epidemics: heart disease, obesity, opiate overdoses, chronic pain, suicide, and traffic death. And boom, there's 1 common denominator worldwide. But the video game industry will never tell you, you've been playing this game for 36 hours, you need to go get some. They'll never do that. Social media, Facebook will never tell you, you need to go get some sleep now. You've been online for 48 hours straight. They will never tell you that. They will use you up and throw you away. They don't care that they're killing you. And they really are pretty much involved in suppressing information on this subject, because it points the finger back at them and the deaths that are at their hands. And then when they fight tooth and nail, my book, Assassination Generation, talks about it. In 2005, the state of California overwhelmingly voted to regulate children's access to violent video games. The data was so powerful, the harm done by violent video games. This is like alcohol. This is like tobacco. This is something adults can do, but kids can't. Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor. He signed the law. He said, I make violent movies. I protect my kids from them. I particularly want to protect them from these violent video games. Home of Hollywood, home of Silicon Valley, overwhelmingly voted. And the video game industry fought all the way to the Supreme Court to sell any game to any kid at any age. And they won. They conned 7 out of 9 old men that never played Pong in their life, overturning the California law. The point is, this industry, not only are they this whole new technology, not only are they the new factor that is causing this increase, the new factor in suicides and traffic deaths and opiate overdoses and heart disease and obesity, but they're doing it to children, and they refuse to accept any regulation of their product to children. So this is this battle that we're in as a civilization against this technology, and every piece of technology had to be digested. We had automobiles for 50 years before somebody said, kids shouldn't be driving these things. Oh, and we're going to hit the point where we say kids shouldn't be doing this. 100 years from now, they'll look back and say, were they insane? Were they crazy? The stuff they did to their kids, the things they inflicted upon the children, the stuff they let them watch, they let them do, were they insane? And I just asked fire and EMS and other responders, I said, can we agree that playgrounds and parks are essential to the health of a city? Playgrounds and parks, essential health of the city. Parks give incredible wellness. Parks are one of the best things. A major scientific study on just the raw data coming over Twitter and associating joy and fun and happiness. Parks came out on top. The only thing that came close was Christmas. The level of joy and fun and happiness we have with Christmas, we have with parks. So parks and playgrounds, essential to the health of the city. So what's it mean when you have empty parks and empty playgrounds? You have a sick city. Every time you drive past a park or playground on a nice day, there's 1 or 2 lonely kids out there. You tell yourself, we have a sick city. There's thousands of kids that ought to be in this playground on a nice day like this, that are sitting at home watching TV, playing video games. We have a sick civilization. And I'll just tie this up. Parenting 101 for the 21st century. When you send your kid to bed at night, take their cell phone away from them. A cop came up during a break in one of my presentations. He said, I had a good girl. He said she was an A student. She said, Dad, it's embarrassing. You don't have to take my cell phone every night. You can trust me. Family policy. Cell phone goes in the charger, go to bed. He said, okay, I trust you. He said a little while later, she took her life. My little girl took her life. He said, we never knew the hell she was living in until we looked at the text messages on her cell phone. Night after night of ceaseless, relentless, vicious bullying. And he can't just ignore that. We're not wired that way. He said it was heartrending to see her up all night long, night after night, trying to defend herself, trying to find somebody to stand up for herself. I knew my little girl was bullied to death. What I didn't understand until now, she was sleep deprived, tormented, and bullied to death in front of my eyes. I let it happen. He said, I can't ignore that text message in the middle of the night. How can we expect our kids to? The one thing on earth I'd done for my little girl was take her cell phone every night, let her turn off all the bad stuff in this world. But who's going to be your mommy? Who's going to make you do that? This global epidemic, these predatory industries. The head of Netflix said their number one competitor is not other online provider. The number one competitor is sleep. The corporate policy of Netflix is to steal your sleep. They don't care that it's killing you. They don't care that it's destroying our civilization. They don't care. They just want to make money. And they want to sell it to children. So as parents, first and foremost, we got to protect our children from this toxic world. But as responders who hold lives in our hands every day, we have got to get that sleep. It is not acceptable to show up to work drunk. It is not acceptable to show up to work sleep deprived because you didn't take the opportunity when you should to get sleep. And that's the heart of the matter.
I think a lot of that comes back to the self-discipline of each person, each fireman, each policeman. And when I say fireman, policeman, I'm not talking only men. I'm talking men and women both. Yes. But that comes back to self-discipline. To the night before, are you guys going out drinking? Are you guys going out to a late dinner? Are you guys staying up watching movies and playing video games? I know for me, I have a timer on my phone. It dings at 8 p.m. Do I always get to bed before 9:30? No, but I do try, because for me, obviously, I love to lift weights. I love to exhaust myself and get sore, so that way the next day I'm struggling to get back up so I can build muscle and get bigger and bigger. But for me, sleep is extremely important. So for us that work, go ahead, sir.
No, the final thing on that sleep thing is when do your muscles grow?
At night.
They grow.
I want to get big.
They grow when you're resting. And so we don't rest enough and we don't sleep enough. And in an officer involved shooting or a wreck or anything like that, let alone the detective on scene, but internal affairs is going to say, how much sleep did you get last night? Mm-hmm. But until that happens, no sergeant ever asks anybody about that. No commander asks anybody about that. I'm not sure what they do at the fire service if they discuss that, but it is important. It's the elephant. It's the elephant in the room, and nobody wants to talk about it.
It really is. And that comes back down to, I think, kind of admitting to ourselves. Now, I did ask this, I posed this question, and I want to relate back to with you talking about with the adrenaline rushes, sir, Colonel, in your book, when I was reading with On Combat, talking about policemen not being able to sleep because they're jittery, their adrenaline's still kicking. But the guys that were fighting overseas, who were fights for 5+ hours, who are completely exhausted, falling asleep before the next wave of a military coming towards them and not being able to stay awake. For first responders, there's such quick responses, there's such quick adrenaline like spikes. Not only medically does it lower your testosterone levels over a long period of time and just drain your adrenal dumps over time, but during the night when you try to sleep, this just happened to me last night. I struggled for an hour just to try to fall back asleep after the second time waking up for a call. And then it just kind of just angers me more, because I'm just real big on sleep for the guys at work, and I'm real big on sleep. I'm like, hey man, and it's only because I've been getting less sleep, so it's affecting me personally. But if it's not affecting most people, I think they'll just kind of overlook it and be like, oh, I'll get some sleep tomorrow night, or I'll get some sleep in a couple nights, or this is just part of it. I might take a nap today.
And part of that equation is the quality of sleep. I tell everybody, we're designed to sleep in total darkness. The fire guys tell me in every bunkhouse there's a dark Nazi. And he's the guy who spray paints the windows black from the inside to make the room completely dark. I tell him, guys, the dark Nazi's right. The research is there. We've got to sleep in the dark and combine it with the sleep mask. One of the things that will rock your world.
A sleep mask. Can you explain that?
Well, you've got a mask that you wear when you sleep.
I got you now.
It shuts out all light. There's one on Amazon that's got 57,000 reviews.
You think it works?
It's got 5.5 stars. You know, the other half a star, the 4.5 stars, the half star, are people who have too big a nose. You guys with big honking noses are the only ones complaining because so got a little slit in it. Makes.
I've got a giant nose, sir, and I'm not going to lie to you, it is huge.
So make a little slit in it, but I'm telling you, just simple things. No more than one drink on the way to bed. Cut off caffeine. At the half-life of caffeine in our body is 5 hours. That means that caffeine took at 5 p.m. It's still at half strength when they go to bed at 10 p.m. And caffeine doesn't make us not sleep. Caffeine makes us have bad quality sleep. It stops us from getting that deep cycle sleep when the tendons and muscles fully relax. We're in the middle of a global caffeine epidemic. Of mega doses of caffeine we're putting in our body, great harm. It's not just sleep, but quality of sleep. And it begins with making that room dark and cool. And maybe having a white noise generator. Those are all things that we can do. Things we got to be careful. No more than one drink on the way to bed. Cut off caffeine at least 5 hours before you go to bed, and preferably 10 hours. I try to cut off caffeine shortly after noon, and no more caffeine from that point on. And I'm the same way. I mean, I'm jealous of my sleep. I want to have quality sleep. Sleep is that little vacation that waits at the end of every day. Guard your sleep, protect your sleep. One of the other things we know is sleep deprivation is a key factor in Alzheimer's and dementia. The data keeps stacking up. It's overwhelming. And lack of deep cycle sleep. And caffeine stopping you from getting deep cycle sleep is a major factor in Alzheimer's. So people say, I'll sleep when I'm dead. We have a decade of Alzheimer's first, that ought to get everybody's attention.
It should.
The body doesn't know how to make us get enough sleep because it always happened naturally when it got dark. So there's nothing macho about going without sleep. There's nothing tough about fooling your body and going without sleep. The professional thing is to manage your sleep. And the obesity or the Alzheimer's thing should scare the daylights out of all of us. Another major epidemic that's exploded. Why is there so much of it? The research keeps coming back to that. And yet, it's, as Mike said, the elephant in the living room. Nobody wants to talk about it. And we got to deal with it. It just, as we love our family, as we love our way of life, we got to walk out that door, give 100%. And that's the area we make the greatest impact.
I think a lot of this would come back towards is making that change. There's two things that firemen hate: change and the way things are. And it's always been that way, and it always will be that way. And there's something that, do you think that changing your shift time, let's say your shift time is at 6 a.m., but you're getting up at 4:30 in the morning for your shift change at 6 a.m. Do you think that changing your time, making it later in the day, or making your shift change towards the evening of the time could help with your sleep patterns, and in return, lower your risk, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's, obesity? Do you think that?
Absolutely. Again, if you're getting up at 4 o'clock, it's throwing off your cycle. I tell my law enforcement agencies, rotating shifts is just the single most harmful thing we can do. It gives everybody jet lag. So what we've got to do is try to stay on a natural shift as much as possible. And I don't know the specifics, and they may change, and there's an up and a downside to everything. But if you're persistently putting yourself in a situation where you got to get up at 4 in the morning for shift change at 6, that's a self-inflicted wound. The military, when we do more before 9 a.m. that most people do all day. We show up for PT at 7 and we work out. But, you get up at 6, PT at 7. That's not too bad. You're up at dawn. But anything earlier than that starts being really counterproductive. And we try to fit it into our natural cycle of daylight. And that's the body's natural thing, is to be the daylight decides when we go to sleep. And throughout the history of our species, it got dark, we went to sleep. There was nothing else to do. And as much as we can stay on that natural cycle is good. I would just tell you that consistency is so important. Every time you change things, you're giving people jet lag. An hour or two change is no big deal. But if you have a 6 hour and 8 hour shift, then that's jet lag that's destroying everybody's performance and truly doing harm to their bodies.
It truly is doing harm to their bodies, and not only just physically to their body, but I think mentally and emotionally as well. I think for responses for because I would say people are more irritable when they're tired, because I've witnessed it and I've also been a victim of it as well. I think that you give better patient care or better response times. You're driving the fire truck at night. There's been times where it feels like I'm drunk driving because I'm so exhausted and I'm so tired. And I'm a real big fan. You can ask anybody that's ever worked for me is I'm going to go take a nap right after lunch. I'll see you in about 3 hours because I've got to get my sleep for that night shift. So that way I am prepared to get up in the middle of the night. There is a question that I do have for both of you with preventing cancer, because cancer is related to sleep deprivation. With preventing cancer now gaining a lot in the fire service, it's becoming more of a larger and bigger thing. Why is it that guys only focus on one thing at a time and not a multitude of more enormous issues that first responders' health are facing?
Wow.
That's for either one of you guys.
What do you think, Mike?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to ponder that for a second.
All right, let me take a shot at it and you come back at it. You know, it's human nature to try to whittle things down to one item. You know, it's human nature to try to simplify matters. As a trainer, I try to simplify things down. But we've got to recognize that the world is incredibly complex. And if we really want to make a difference, we've got to come from every direction. And we've got to apply every factor that we can. So let's say that health and wellness is your issue. Well, what applies to health and wellness? You know, hydration, quality of food, exercise, sleep. You know, I tell people, your body is a table of many legs. Let's say it's got 4 legs. You know, food. You can be, health Nazi food nut. You can be double camelback hydration nut. You can be, the workout crazy nut. But if you're sleep deprived, then you're a 3-legged table. And you put pressure on a 3-legged table, the table collapses. You're only as strong as the weakest leg. So models that come up with multiple dynamics, you can be the PT workout, crazy double camelback, nutrition Nazi. But if you're sleep deprived, it's for nothing, because that you're only as strong as the weakest leg of your table. Human nature is to try to focus on just one thing at a time, but the truth is the world's complex, and we're complex creatures. We're capable of addressing multiple things. We're capable of getting a good workout and good diet and good hydration and good sleep. We're perfectly capable of doing all of those. When we look at cancer, heart disease is a great example. I use a heart disease model for crime. Well, I played all those games and I'm not a killer. Well, I smoked for a lifetime and I don't have cancer. There's lots of people like that. It's a factor in the equation, and we strive to bring heart disease down. We have diet and health, and we do all these other things, and now we brought heart disease down, and the tobacconist says, well, see, heart disease is down. How can it say tobacco causes cancer when heart disease is down? So this interactive model has to be brought into play. And it's human nature to try to whittle it down to that single object, when the truth is it's actually counterproductive. You got to find a handful of critical dynamics and try to address all of them in a holistic manner to really be able to make a change. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Yeah,
Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, and when you were talking about the table and stuff, that helped me think of proper balance. We have to have balance in our life. I have to have work balance, home balance. For me personally, having a church and a spiritual balance helped me stay grounded. At the same time, Matt, you like to work out. You've seen some guys that are at the gym and all they want to do is do biceps and bench press, and they forget their back and they forget their legs. Well, that's your core, and you have to be balanced. You have to do it all. Yeah, nobody enjoys leg day or whatever. It's not as sexy as doing biceps or bench press, but it's important to the overall balance.
That is true. And to relate to that, back to weightlifting and only guys doing upper body, it comes down to, what are you doing this for? Are you doing this for somebody else? Or are you doing this for yourself? Because I'm doing this for myself, and which is why I'm trying to hit everything. I'm trying to keep everything equal and balanced. In the fire service, who are you doing this for? Are you doing it for the shirt that's on your back? Are you doing it just to walk around and be like, yeah, I'm a fireman, or I'm a cop? Or are you doing this because you truly care about the people? You truly care about the civilians that are out there.
And that is key. And we've all been around guys that have the t-shirt and the badge to say, hey, this is what I am.
Yeah.
But when the chips are down, those guys came to me because I did it for the right reasons. And they knew that I did things for the right reasons. Yeah, I took an oath, but I didn't want to just be a cop. I wanted to be a good cop. And if I were a firefighter, I wouldn't want to just be a firefighter. I'd want to be a good firefighter, doing it for the right reasons. Yeah, it's not always about the pay. Yeah, there are some perks that come with the job. People generally have respected firefighters and police officers. Under the last couple of years, certainly police have come under attack, and it hasn't been held in the high esteem that it should be. Part of that is our fault because we were not balanced and we made some mistakes along the way, and we have to accept that. We have to own that.
Yes. And then the thing that comes back to ownership and taking pride in ownership in what you do is guys that are just going to sit there and self-reflect. And the biggest thing that I've noticed for myself is just the notice of the possibility of change, that you're going to have to sit there and say, hey, the way I've been doing this is wrong. Like I've had bad attitudes when I've walked into the firehouse, and I've always been told you got to check your attitude at the door as soon as you walk in. What are you going to be doing today if you've just got a bad attitude? I'm probably going to be the bad apple out of the crew, and I'm just going to bring everybody else down with me. And so what are we doing here? Are we building everybody up, or are we going to tear each other down? So with saying that and adding into that, do you think that part of the neglect, this is for Colonel, do you think this part of the neglect of first responders' health could be related or to not wanting to look weak compared to those who have served overseas? Because a lot of guys that go into police and fire departments, they're prior military, so they don't want to look weak to those other gentlemen that are there or ladies that are there that have served.
Wow, I never thought of that. I don't know. It's kind of interesting that said we've got a lot of prior service military people there, and you're right, they do want to maintain the standard. That can cut both ways. It comes back. What a great insight, Mike, on balance. That was just so well said, and it really comes back again to balance in this situation. You bring with you the skills and the traits of your deployment and of your military experience, but you got to balance that with the demands of this new environment and the need to be. Like you said, you don't want to be the bad apple in the barrel that day. You don't want to be the one that pulls the crew down that day. You want to be part of the team. And I never would have thought that. Can you give an example or a case study of how you saw that manifest itself, maybe?
For myself, yeah. Me coming into a firehouse, I'll go ahead and say it. As an ego type of thing, I'm 255 pounds, about 6 feet tall, and I love to hit the gym. So I'm a little bit bigger. So when I go and meet somebody else, you typically, as a young guy, I'm 29 years old, I want to be seen as somebody who can carry himself. I want to be seen as somebody who can do the job. And when I go and work with some of these guys, I work with a gentleman who's an Army Ranger, former Army Ranger. And then I've also worked with a guy who is in the Air Force Special Forces as an air combat controller. And then a guy who was in the MARSOC Raiders. So those guys I want to impress. I want to make an impression on them to show them I can do this too. But also, I don't want to sit here and tell them when there's something that's bothering me that, hey, that run has really bothered me. Like, I feel like it's just kind of sticking with me too much, because I don't want to put on a light to them that the stuff that they had seen or done overseas has not meant anything to them, and my thing is way worse. And that is psychologically, to me, I've had to self-reflect on, this is just how my life has been. I never got to go into the military and go overseas. So I just don't want to be disrespectful to them. I just didn't know if you had kind of experienced any of that or had read any studies on that.
The only thing I can tell you is that, they got to come home and turn it off, and you've got to do it for a lifetime. And what you're doing is much harder than what they do over any period of time. Furthermore, violence has exploded to levels we've never seen before. Medical technology is holding down the murder rate. The number of dead people every year underrepresents the problem because medical technology is saving ever more lives every year. It's actually much, much worse than it looks. The worst annual increase in homicides we ever saw was 12% one year in the 1960s. And then in 2020, we had a 30% annual increase in homicides. It's beyond anything we've ever seen before. But when we try to compare it to the 1960s, the comparison breaks down because medical technology is saving ever more lives. You save a crime victim's life, you prevented a murder. And so I tell you that in the domestic front, it's much, much worse. There's guys that have multiple deployments. I know a guy has 9 combat tours, and nothing really much happened. He says, I'm freaking Mother Teresa. Anywhere I showed up in the world, peace broke out. But it's true for a lot of those guys. You assume they saw a lot. It means that, 1 or 2 intense firefights, but then it's over, and they go back. To war is 99% boredom and 1% sheer terror. Well, you're out there dealing with it every day. So give yourself a lot of credit. All the first responders out there, you're functioning in the most violent times in peacetime recorded history. You're functioning in the middle of the borders coming unglued, and crime dynamics and gang dynamics of enormous magnitude. We got the flag behind you with the blue line and the red line. We honor the flag. We honor the service. But you got to understand that there's a biological need to be part of a larger group. And one person in the jungle alone is cat food. 10 people with spears is the apex predator anywhere in the world. So we got to be part of a larger group. Our group is our nation, that with the Pledge of Allegiance, a national anthem that reinforces our group. But if it's cool to dishonor the flag, if it's cool to dishonor the anthem, if athletes say it's cool to be unpatriotic, then who will fill that gap? And the gangs will fill that gap in the blink of an eye. If you say patriotism is bad, then the gangs will fill that gap. It's only one thing that's there waiting to fill that gap. Gang membership has exploded. Gang crimes have exploded. Last year, an all-time record number of police officers murdered in the line of duty. And it's gang murders, and the gangs of the nation has ordered them to kill. This year, we're already ahead of where we were the previous year. August of last year, we had more cops murdered than all the previous year put together. That was a bad year. We're already ahead of where we were in cops murdered last year, and that was an all-time record bad year. So you're out there in these incredibly violent times. You got to believe in who you are and believe in what you do, and recognize that those guys will tell you, man, I was there for a year and I came home. And yeah, maybe we had 1 or 2, combat incidents. We had to make some patrols. We had an IED. But those were just, an incident, 4, 5, 6, 10 incidents in one deployment. When you're out there dealing with death every day, keep it in perspective and know that they respect you every bit as much, that you can hold your head high in comparison to them, and recognize how desperately bad the time is and how much we need you. And Mike, any thoughts to piggyback onto that?
Yeah, I used to think similarly, but after talking with some military guys, certainly training some at the police department, I wouldn't take a back seat to any of them. There are a few guys that were in combat, and I respect them for that. There are plenty of guys that did a military career that saw no combat. They were sitting here stateside ordering large screen TVs. That's not to discount their service, but what I've done and the stories that I can tell, some of the things that I've seen, what our officers are facing now, you don't even know who the enemy is. It is so easy to kill a cop. And I hate to say that, but that is true. All I have to do is call up a disturbance at a house. The first responders, if they're anything like me, are rushing to that to get on scene and try to save lives. I could have a sniper across the street. He just called in a bad address and he's just taking pot shots at people. If an officer does a routine traffic stop, going up, hey, somebody has a tail light out, I'm just going to warn them about their tail light. And he goes up not knowing that that was going to be the last call he was ever on because the guy inside had a felony warrant. And that's scary. And that will take a toll over time on someone's life. Just that constant living way up here with unknown threats. A lot of times, and you correct me if I'm wrong, firefighters, if there's something going on, shots fired, the scene's hot, they will wait until it's code 4, until police say, hey, everything's under control before they roll in. And so sometimes I joke, and this is totally in jest, that God made police officers so firefighters could have heroes.
That's true.
But
sometimes,
you know, if we're going to be honest with each other, there has been times where fire and police have been, you know, butting heads when they should not be. They should be working in concert with each other, because I might call on you to save my life. Mm-hmm. I might be called upon at one of your scenes. Many a time, the police have been the first on scene, even at a fire, and I've rushed through the house pulling people out before fire gets there. We each have a job to do, and it's up to us. Are we going to do that job and do it well?
Mike, that is incredible that you mentioned that. It's something that with working with my officer that I have is when we've got having each other's backs as fire and police. Our department, where I work at, and our police department, all the guys that are in the street, they get along really, really well. The police come in, we keep welcoming them in to our firehouses. We want them to come inside and talk and hang out with us. We try to get meals with them. Actually, one of the police officers from our city was just calling me. I'm not going to take that right now, but the relationship, you know what, you can put him on hold. He's a cop. If he was a fireman, I got to answer that. I'm going to answer that. But the relationship that you build with these guys is extremely important. And to comment on what you were just mentioning about is there have been departments that have just butted heads and gotten to fistfights with their police officers because of just disagreements. And that comes down to, it could be coming down to an ego thing of I'm the boss, you don't listen to what I'm going to tell you because I'm a cop, or I'm the officer of this truck, on this fire truck. You're going to listen to what I'm telling you because this is my scene. And that it has to come back down to, I think, is a compromise. How can you conversate with these guys of, hey, I respect what you do, but right now this is my patient. So this is how we're going to take care of our patient. I will let you know what we need. And can you please take care of this patient? They're getting a little too rowdy for us. Can you calm them down? And then just understanding that they're professionals in their jobs, and as are we. There's a situation that what you literally just mentioned with a cop just doing a routine pulling over of a person, and the person had a felony warrant. That literally just happened not too long ago here in Indiana, in Elwood Police Department. We had a young police officer. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. We just watched his funeral that just happened, who was pulling over somebody. And it was, I believe, just for something basic. And he didn't even have his firearm pulled out of his holster. And the guy had a felony warrant for himself, turns around and just starts shooting. I believe it was an AK-47, just starts shooting at the police car. It struck him, and he never even was able to pull out his firearm, and he passed away. The kid was, I believe, 22 or 24 years old. I believe less than a year on for the police department. He served in the Army, I believe, and didn't even get to be a father, didn't even get to experience a lot of life. And it was taken just for a random police stop. And that happens all too often. Oh, you go ahead, sir.
It does happen all too often. I just made a recent post in the police officer's badge, and he puts a shroud on it when an officer is killed in the line of duty. Well, I've seen enough of those shrouds this year alone. Police officers, it's been open hunting season on police officers. And it's incumbent on leadership in our country to say enough is enough. This doesn't get to happen on my watch. And I know we don't want to have public executions of people who kill cops, but punishment should be swift. And we're glorifying these criminals and letting them make excuses. When the police officer at the end of the day he's trying to do his job. And we want law and order in this country, I think, if we're honest with ourselves. And this pendulum of violence and lawlessness in our country has to swing back, because what we've tried over the last 2 years has failed miserably. And we don't need to get necessarily political here, but lives are at stake. Let's call it like it is.
That is true. And the most difficult thing to have those conversations with people, and I'm sure Mike and Colonel, you guys both face this, is having that talk politically with other firemen and other cops and military members. Prosecutors are not prosecuting criminals. They're not. It happens in every state that they're either being whoever their distinguished people are that are donating money to them don't want them to do certain actions, but the prosecutors here for the guy that just shot the police officer and killed him, they're not going as hard as they should. And it happens all over. Look at California. They're not prosecuting people that are doing this stuff. And that is a difficult discussion to have. And I think that you're going to see, in my personal opinion, I think you're going to see a lot more police departments and fire departments, if they're in the union, you're going to see them getting more active in politics, because it is wrong. And there should be harsher punishments for people who commit these types of crimes. It's people who are committing murders against police officers. And thank God there's not a whole lot happening towards firemen, but the attack has been on police, and it's been on police. The attack on police has been happening for quite a few years now, ever since really of what happened a couple of years ago with the pandemic. It is just metastasized and gotten larger.
Let's kind of wrap up on, if you don't mind, we're going to wrap up on that theme, because it begs the question, why do we keep doing it? Why didn't you didn't become a firefighter or cop to get rich, at least not legally, right? You didn't do this job to be a famous celebrity, at least not in a good way. Then why do we keep doing it? And all I do is I tell people why I keep doing it. I retired from the Army 25 years ago. I've been on the road over 200 days a year. I just had 2 weeks on the road, got home, and waiting at home for me is my bride of 47 years, my high school sweetheart. I tell people, she was 15. I was 17 when I proposed to her. We are from Arkansas.
That's beautiful.
2 years later, she married a crazy Army paratrooper and been this ride with me for 47 years. And why do I spend so much time away? Well, because I love my children. I love my grandchildren. I love my nation. I love my God. And we both agree that every day that I have the health, every day that somebody wants to hear what God to give, I'm going to walk out that door and do it. And I got incredible people like Mike standing behind me, working the nuts and bolts to make it possible. And we believe in what we do. And it's about love. If you had a sick baby, would you abandon your family? Sick baby, didn't sign up for that. I'm out of here. No, you'd empty the bank account. You'd start a Kickstarter fund. You or your spouse would quit the job to be with the sick child full time. That's what love means. Love means the worse it gets, the harder we fight. Our nation's sick right now. It's sick. It's bad. And it needs our help. If we love our nation, if we love our God, if we love our family, if we love our community, if we love our fellow man, now is the time to walk out that door and give 100%. We will not fail our civilization, our nation, our family, our community in this dark hour. We will not be the one that says, I give up. Because the only way you beat these bastards is to stay in the fight. The only thing in the universe you can control is yourself. And if you let them pull you out of the fight, then they win. And the only way I can win is to stay in the fight. 65 years old is my prayer. I can do it for another 20 years. And it comes back to love. And the opposite of evil is not good. The opposite of evil is love, because evil is the absence of love, just as darkness, the absence of light. And we're going to fight this evil with love. We're going to fight it with the love of our family, the love of our children, the love of our nation, the love of our God. That love will empower us to walk out that door and give 100%. And like I said, Mike is behind me, making it possible. We believe in what we're doing. And we're honored to be on your show. And we honor your listeners who are striving for more than just a 5-minute soundbite. We're striving for greater depths of knowledge, and we honor you for putting this together. You're not doing this to make gobs of money, that's for sure. Once again, this podcast is not going to make you rich and famous. You're trying to make a difference. You're trying to leverage your life and leverage your skills to make the world just a little bit better place. And that's what we're all doing. It's just giving our best shot. Mike, any last words to wrap that up with?
No, it's well said. And we are happy to have met you today, Matt. And we wish you the best. You're young, so stay in the fight. That's my encouragement to you. Stay consistent one day at a time. Be a leader, be a mentor when you can. Know when to be quiet, when you should be quiet. And we'll look forward to seeing you down the road.
Cool.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and just talk with little old me. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for the insight and the knowledge that you guys have both shared to me and all my listeners. I really appreciate it.
Iron sharpens iron.
Yes, one man sharpens another.
Amen.
Take care.
You too, guys. Hey, you made it to the very end of the video. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for taking the time out of your busy schedule and your daily lives to sit here and listen to me and Lieutenant Colonel and Mike Baldwin talk about sleep deprivation and suicide and basically men's health and women's health in the fire service for first responders. I hope that you learned something out of this and pick something up out of it. I hope you make some changes in your life for the better, get some more sleep. That's one thing that I'm always a big fan of. But go ahead down in the comment section if you watch this off of YouTube or if you've seen this on anything else. Hit me up on Instagram. Let me know what you think of this episode. What were some things that really stood out to you? What is it that you're going to try to make a change in your life? Either getting to bed earlier, cutting the caffeine off, checking on other guys to see how their sleep schedules are going. So with that all being said, again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. God bless you guys and be safe.